Hi, and welcome back to our reading of The Red Lion by Maria Schepis. Last time we covered chapter 4, and today we're going to follow our protagonist Hans Burgner further into his self-loathing, where he is digging himself an ever deeper self-imposed trap of trickery and charlatanism, really, while at the same time he has now gained these undesirable powers of seeing the underworld, which exists all around him as he goes about.
Du våker, for natten skader ingen, og jeg lover. Jeg vil våke ved din side, og vokte deg i natt. Og til deg, hver dag redd mens du sover, for dagen din venn, og jeg lover, når den over, vil jeg våke ved din side, og vokte
Chapter 5, The Magic Name. The Marquis of Brandenburg-Ausbach's coach came for me the third evening of my convalescence. Came complete with a guard of honor of a whole cavalry troop. There was even a physician who bled me in spite of my strenuous protests. Anton Bruggendorf pretended great distress, but he must have sold me to the Marquis for a fancy price. His smug satisfaction kept showing through his hypocritical anxiety. After all, he had gotten a good deal out of me: gold, recognition, and almost a child. The Marquis had been on his way to his summer residence in Dreisesselberg. Bruggendorf had probably sent him a messenger at the border, and so they came to an agreement, and I was sold like an object. At the time, I was defenseless. My legs still hurt too badly for me to think of escape. As we were saying goodbye, Charlotte slipped a tiny red heart on a chain into my palm. Vengefully, I put it into the mayor's hand as he paid his massive homage. The only satisfaction I had out of that whole wretched affair was seeing Charlotte's fright and Bruggendorf's bafflement. Probably, the ugly old aunt whose life I had saved in the cellar was the only one really sorry to see me go. I was carried to the coach like a sacred relic. A heavy brocade blanket was spread over my knees, and my back was propped up with an armorial silk pillow. The Marquis and his group had already gone on. My companion was the fox-faced doctor. He gave me plenty to eat and drink and was very solicitous of my comfort. He was gravely worried about my welfare, for I was a tremendous responsibility. Like all other court parasites, his own welfare and security hung by a slender thread. All courtiers, I had realized, revolved around a moody sun that was far less trustworthy than the industrious one that centers our cosmos. Kings, princes, and counts indulged themselves at will throughout the boundaries of their power, held back only by the leash of their own impulses. Their insect-like subjects, terror-stricken, either avoided or imitated the St. Vitus's dance of their rulers' passions until they got too close to their fire and were annihilated. I was brought to a castle that was designed to be impenetrable. The barred windows looked like deep wells in walls that were 5 feet thick, and cleverly designed and tended promenades spanned a gaping dark chasm. It took us a week, even using relay horses, to get to it by the winding mountain roads. Twice we had to spend the night in the open. This grim castle in the middle of a forbidding forest was the Marquis's summer residence. I was put to bed in the highest room of the rectangular tower. From my bed I could look through a broad window into the valley below, where there was a toy village of red-roofed houses, colorful fields, and a silvery little river. In the mornings it would rise out of a milky fog, and in the evenings it would fade slowly from my sight, as though a magician had made it disappear peacefully. This prison of mine was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. For the castle itself perched over the sunlit valley like an evil vulture. For a while, no one disturbed me. I saw no one but the servants and the doctor, as I was supposed to be ill. From the very beginning, I was aware of the aura of malevolence around this castle. It was the home of dark emotions, fears, and unnatural passions. The wraiths of spilled blood and unconsoled sorrows wailed unheard in the rooms at night. The atmosphere was so pervasive that even those who did not have tense nerves and cursed eyes were aware of it. I noticed that the servants who cleaned the room and even the doctor were afraid. An old man with sunken eyes brought me my meals. He had a low, receding forehead, and his tangled hair stuck out around his ears. He would be a dangerous man if angered, I thought. Those thick, red fingers and clubby thumbs revealed a blind, murderous temper. But he could be handled just as one handles a ferocious animal. He liked to drink, and drink loosens the tightest lips. This violent monster would become a whining child under the influence of wine. He would tell about walled-in countesses, skeletons that embraced you, and worm-eaten cabinets in the corridors from which cold, misty ghosts glided every night. The old man dreaded the coming of night. His room was right under the attic, and every full moon the demons had a hellish ball over his head. "There's a slimy, many-armed monster living in one of my old chests," he told me. "He is my enemy, the one who is buried under the 7th barrel in the cellar. When he was alive, he was in the Marquis's service not long ago. He managed that wine cellar. He was a handsome, loud-mouthed fellow, and he loved to tease me. He was always asking how many mistresses I had, when I had last looked in a mirror, and how I could stand to sleep with myself. One time we went down together to get some wine, and I choked him to death in the middle of a laugh. The laugh changed to a death rattle in his throat. I enjoyed that. Of course, I've repented since, because from then on I've heard that laugh from the chest. That and the slithery noise of a reptile's body." "Didn't anybody find out you had murdered him?" I asked, astonished. The old man gave a grotesque, frightening laugh. "Oh, yes, he knows. He wanted me to." "Who did?" "Our most gracious lord." The Marquis? Why? I shuddered. The cellarman? He mentioned the name in the Marquis's presence. What name? His repulsive face showed a flash of cunning. I'll tell you if you'll stop the laugh in the box. I know you're a warlock. I had to get this information to save my own skin. All right, I said, I will stop the laugh in your chest. Here's what you do. Take the chest into the cellar, put the remains of the corpse in it, and roll it into the chasm under the promenade. The swamp goblins that live there will cling to it and keep it from surfacing. Then you must send a binding spell after it to paralyze it, lean over the chasm every evening and shout slowly and distinctly, I have killed the laugh, I won't hear it anymore. I have killed the laugh, I won't hear it anymore. Okay, I got it. How long do I have to repeat the ceremony? That depends on when you first heard the laugh, after the murder. The first time? Last year, about this time of year. Then you must do it for a full year. Now, what is the name for which this Marquis wanted the cellarman killed? The old man leaned very close. Solomon Trismosen. He said the words softly and fearfully. At the sound of that name, I felt a surge of power around us. A wave of horror swirled through the castle's tepid silence as he finished speaking. But this insane horror did not come from the famous and immortal alchemist Trismosen. It came from the Marquis's fears, which were nourishing a legion of demons. Did you know Trismosen? I asked in a whisper. The old man nodded. He was here. He stared around fearfully. In this very room for a long time. Our most gracious Lord had him here under guard. He wanted him to make gold and poison that works from long distance. The Marquis has many enemies, but Trismosen refused. He disappeared suddenly from the torture chamber, disappeared without a trace. But before he left, he wrote on the wall in his own blood that his very name would hinder our Lord in committing his sins. Why, if the Marquis even thinks of the name Trismosen, God help the man who utters it in his presence. His days are numbered. We finally managed to scrape the traces of blood off the wall, but the spoken name acts just as effectively. That's why the mouth that utters it must be shut forever. But what is the use of shutting mouths if the Marquis has only to think of the name? The servant winked. You'll see how the Marquis takes care of that. He has a whole company around him all the time. Clowns, musicians, whores, quack doctors. He even buys cripples to amuse him, and he employs 2 thieves to invent diversions. Diversions can make him deaf to the name, and at night he takes a stupefying drug, so he won't dream. He drinks too. My God, how he drinks! I'm sure what he wants from you is a potion that will make him forget what he doesn't want to remember. But what does this name do to him anyhow? I asked. Does it really keep him from doing what he likes? Oh no, he has done many evil things since then, but somehow the deeds seem to cling to him. You know how it is with a powerful lord. He gets rid of anyone who is in his way or has insulted or threatened him. It's a God-given right. He's not accountable to any man. But Trismosen did put some kind of hex on our Lord. Now, all the people he has killed throng around him all the time. They appear to be more alive and outrageous in death than they ever were in life, and they can accuse and torture him with impunity. But only when he thinks of that name. You'll often hear him moan as he tries to push them away. He raises barricade after barricade, but they always get back in through the door of the name. Nobody has ever been able to close that door. The key is missing. If you are lucky enough to find that key for him, you will be set up for the rest of your life. Thus, I learned my function at the castle of Dreisesselberg. I also learned that there lived another miserable soul like myself, who was sizzling alive in the boiling oil of his own fear, and who was defenseless against his fate. Chapter 6. The Centaur. The most striking thing about the Marquis von Brandenburg-Ausbach was the flatness of his skull that was covered by thinning blonde hair. No eyelashes protected the protuberant watery blue eyes, and his nose was as dainty as a woman's. Though his upper lip was narrow and curved pleasantly, his lower lip was full and hung loose, giving him a petulant expression. His fair skin was splotched with freckles, and as a whole he appeared to be a sickly, stunted man, full of capricious desires but lacking the strength to carry them through. His power was a grave misfortune to him, for his servants complied with even his most whimsical request as soon as it was made. He was a man too weak to be good, and yet also too weak to do effective evil. He was afraid of his victims, horrified of his actions, and paralyzed by remorse. For every evil plot he conceived, he had to find a scapegoat, someone to punish. The result was that he committed irrevocable deeds like a debtor makes loans to ward off the evil day. This wax centaur image was really a helpless pawn in the great eternal battle between the forces of light and darkness. He was even now sizzling in purgatory, and both sides were waiting for the roast. Solomon Trismosen had indeed known where to write his name. That one bloody name lived perpetually in the Marquis and fought off a vast army of demons. I knew the truth of the matter before I even met him. The name of Solomon Trismosen has more powerful than the darkest demon. The Marquis was graciously pleased to receive me in his dressing room, where an animal trainer was entertaining him with a mock wedding enacted by dogs. A grimacing monkey was driving a small gold coach pulled by 4 black dogs. The Marquis laughed like a child. "Come in, Magister, and watch this," he said, motioning to me. "Aren't they cute?" Just then the veiled bride dog uncovered a basket in the coach to reveal a tiny white puppy. Then she put her paw bashfully over her face. The bridegroom, shaken, ran away whimpering, and the Marquis picked up the puppy and kissed it as the parade moved on. Then he sent everyone away. Now we were alone, the Marquis with the puppy snuggling in his lap. The man's insecurity was immediately apparent. He who had unlimited powers in his own domain seemed awkward and flustered as he addressed me. He spoke with obvious embarrassment, skirting the one subject that really interested him. First, he asked after my health and if all my needs had been tended. After briefly expressing my gratitude, I decided to get to the root of the matter. "There is an ominous atmosphere in your castle, my most gracious lord," I began without preamble. "Hostile forces work here against someone." He winced, and the skin around one eye twitched convulsively. "What have you noticed, and what kind? Whom are they working against?" He stammered, flushing. I did not answer immediately. "Speak!" he screeched, his eyes burning like blue pits in his grey face. "Against your own most noble life, salvation and peace," I replied quietly. He leaned forward eagerly. "Who is that you're talking about? Where is he?" He is not a tangible entity to have a specific location. He has not body or visible form, and yet is always present. His name means death, and he is deathless. Now the Marquis's face was a mask of horror with apparently dead eyes. He collapsed in the chair, and I thought he had fainted. But his trembling fingers still convulsively kneaded the puppy's fur. Suddenly he burst into tears, and before I knew what was happening, he was kneeling in front of me, clinging to me as though he were drowning. He garbled all kinds of pleas and promises. Deeply shocked by such pitiful behavior, I made to raise him. "No, let me stay here," he panted. "This is my proper place on the ground like a worm." He twitched away from my outstretched hands. "You don't know what I really am. They ought to shake or rattle when I approach, like they do with lepers. Leave me alone, or else give me some deadly nostrum so I can die forever and become peaceful dust and ashes. Merciful Father, misericordia." He beat his breast. Suddenly he looked at me with the whites of his eyes showing, and I knelt beside him to hear the secret he whispered in a choked voice. "I'm afraid. I'm afraid to live or die. Do you understand? Dying is the more terrifying. I know it will all end sometime. The carnival diversions and spells and drugs and liquor, they're already getting a place ready for me in hell. I saw it. I was under the reversed cross during the Black Mass. They were all there, right in front of me, the ones they were alive. I ordered them tortured, their flesh torn off in shreds, their bones crushed to pulp." He leaned toward me, and I smelled his sour breath. "They are here now, always, always around me. They mock my gestures and threaten me. It is their faces I see in the mirror instead of my own, and during Holy Mass." His lips worked soundlessly as he struggled to continue. I silently lifted him and set him back in his chair. His condition frightened me and oppressed my jangled nervous system. What could I tell him? I who myself had no defense against fear? How could I help him when I couldn't even help myself? Abruptly he raised bloodshot eyes. "I order you to conjure him up," he said weakly. "You must summon him here by any means that are possible. The more I try to forget his name, the louder I hear it. He has won. I surrender unconditionally. He's the only one who can bring me peace, so I can pray undisturbed and be forgiven. He's the only one. Go, prepare the act. That's what I brought you here for. I will do whatever is necessary." "Whom shall I conjure up?" My voice was anxious, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I fondly hoped I had misunderstood what he asked of me. "Him?" The Marquis tried to say more, but his voice refused to function. He covered his face with his hands. "I will write it, have it written for you. When you have prepared, let me know." Summon someone who wasn't dead? Someone who was an initiate in the powers that ruled the three worlds? Would he summon a powerful magus by the lips of a sinful, ignorant slave? Must I shout silly commands from hell to heaven? What kind of success could I possibly hope for? Yet the Marquis had ordered me to make the attempt, and I had to do it for my own sake. I knew well enough what would happen if I refused to try. In the torture chamber, my cursed life would cling to me as a bloodhound clings to its victim. I would not faint to relieve the agony, and I suddenly realized I couldn't even die. The Marquis had given me free access to his extensive library. Here in this dusty, cold chamber, the astral beings had reigned for centuries like bats in an otherwise uninhabited tower. It contained a rare collection of the occult, manuscripts so ancient they crumbled to the touch, forbidden works on black magic, treatises on alchemy, the Kabbalah, religious works, and the profane works of excommunicated priests. They filled the shelves and overflowed onto cabinets and tables. The wet logs that crackled in the poorly vented fireplace managed to generate more smoke than heat. The smoke rasped in my lungs and made my eyes water, while the noisome fire provided no protection whatever against the icy mountain winds that blew through a large open window. My only light was the wavering torches in the wrought iron rings on the wall. I could barely make out the faded lines written in indifferent longhand. I was sick and miserable, and the vultures from the other world that had been bound here by the book's dark formulae hovered over me. Here was a manuscript copy of the famous Clavicula Solomonis, written on heavy parchment. Initials and diagrams studded the illuminated Latin text. There was Dr. Carter's Book of Raziel, along with Abraham von Worm's Book of Ancient Practices. Somehow these two had managed to live peacefully under an Old Testament with an ivory cover. The monsters immediately drew my attention to the infamous sorcery book of Honorius of Grimoire. It was surrounded by clusters of reptile bodies with writhing tentacles and curved talons. When I picked it up, they screamed in rage and fear. But by now, I knew these creatures could not kill me. They could only terrorize me, keep me in perpetual tension, and confuse me. I decided to pretend not to see them, and sometimes I succeeded. We managed to establish brief armistices this way, and thus I was lulled into making a dangerous mistake. I began to underrate their power. I took the books I needed to my room to make the necessary notes to prepare for the conjuring the Marquis ordered. I won't relate in detail those nightmarish days and nights in which I was thrust into the vortices of both hells and locked into place there by a fiery circle of formulae, words that summoned demons and horrible living spells. This period of intense terror changed my appearance so drastically that even the Marquis was frightened when he saw me again. I had wasted to skin and bones, and my eyes had sunk in their sockets. Respect and hope conquered the Marquis's fear, and he grabbed my arm. I can see, Magister, that you have been spending your time on pursuits that burn through the body and liberate the spirit. Tell me what you have accomplished. I told him that we both had to make a 21-day preparation for our conjuring, and that he needed certain articles made by craftsmen and weavers. He impatiently gave a series of frenzied commands, and his servants promptly flew into motion. He himself performed his magical exercises with fanatical diligence and fasted faithfully at my instructions. This exact following of a manifold ritual was an escape for me as well. I didn't want to think about the object of our preparation, that experiment that loomed in front of me like a tunnel leading into the unknown. And that ominous day that was the end of our anxieties rushed at us as though drawn by wild horses.
Plan, searching my land for an enemy, came across love's sweet cause, and in the face of beauty, evil was lost. Cold hearts down to their graves, murdered the dawn, spreading their scorn, cursing the sun of which love was born. We must keep them away, or pretty soon we'll pay and count the cost in sorrow. Sacrifice, the future has its price, and today's only yesterday's tomorrow. Sacrifice, the future has its price, and today is only yesterday's tomorrow. Tomorrow.